ADR. You probably became very familiar with the concept after the release of Madam Web this past summer.
He was in the Amazon with my mom when she was researching spiders right before she died.
Particularly with how bad it was done in the movie. There were lines inserted while a character's lips weren't moving.
I agreed to provide security.
Bad dubbing over obviously alternate dialogue, and a lot of extra plot information slipped in when someone's head was turned away from the camera. For a comprehensive breakdown of this in Madam Web, I highly recommend Nando V Movies video. It's really excellent and worth the watch even if you haven't caught the movie on streaming yet. But would you believe that the practice of re-recording, adding, and changing audio is actually quite common in most movies?
Take 9.
The light of Zarth is here.
That's the question on this Fact v Fiction, where we'll look into what ADR is and why it's used in a majority of movies.
And you have my bow. And my axe.
Often without you noticing.
And you have my bow.
And my axe.
We'll look at some examples I've been able to pick out of lines being changed or added in post that actually worked and served to make the scene better.
That's right. I'm finding good to you.
And don't worry, I've got lots more fun examples of it going very poorly like Madam Web as well.
We would be sloppy. You calling us sloppy?
I'm Rick, and thank you for joining me on what turned out to be actually a much deeper dive into the subject that I meant it to be, but here we are. So thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. So what is ADR? Well, the acronym stands for Automated Dialogue Replacement, or Additional Dialogue Replacement, the later making more sense to me. It's also known in the industry as looping.
Nothing fancy, no heroics, by the book this time.
Traditionally, it's when an actor re-records lines of dialogue in a studio, syncing up to a performance already given on set.
Basically, you have to lip sync yourself. So you've got to get everything in time and say it with the right inflection and all that kind of stuff. It really is its own art form.
There's a few good reasons this might have to be done.
On the day of the shoot, you were using fans, so there was too much traffic in New York, or the shot was too wide and the sound guy couldn't get the microphone closer. So you want to replace the actor's sound with cleaner, better sound.
Also, one of the great advantages of providing clean studio audio is that it tends to be easier to mix into the rest of the stuff. Sound effects, background, atmosphere, if you're a sound mixer or editor. You know, those 2 Academy Award categories that you don't actually know the difference of and that you just guess every year anyway.
Though you may not always notice their work, masters of both craft can startle, excite, and move audiences in both ways that is enormously powerful.
You know, when they even bother to air the categories on TV. And again, this happens a lot more often than you think. Sets are messy and noisy, and even the best sound equipment and engineers are going to pick up stray noise.
I read the book.
Marlon Brando's purring cat in The Godfather was reportedly so loud that they had to loop most of his lines later.
It was so awful that subtitles were almost considered for the moment until editors managed to loop re-recorded phrases over the sequence.
But the best example of using ADR near seamlessly in a movie for me is Lord of the Rings.
Seeking it all, his thought is bent on it.
A lot of audio had to be added in post-production. And I'm not just talking about the fun stuff like that time Peter Jackson got a cricket stadium to chant Black speech in order to be used for Saruman's Uruk-hai army. I'm talking about 90% of the spoken lines had to be looped. The actors coming back in, watching themselves on tape, and re-recording.
We're re-recording the dialogue for about 98% of the film, which is a lot more than is normal, but we've got a whole bunch of problems that most films don't have.
Because of the sheer size of the production, we sort of spread out around a series of Wellington warehouses. And, and through some unknown reason, a couple of these warehouses were actually right next door to the airport.
You're recording dialogue, and then when we finally get in our hot little hands or watch it at Rush's that night, you go, nice plane effect, you know, in Lord of the Rings.
A good mixer and editor can add these lines in seamlessly when giving the time and resources.
Is it secret? Is it safe?
Manipulating the audio, reverb, to make the audio seem like it's actually happening within the space of the scene.
Things that were. Things that are.
But when it's done badly, the voices can sound disembodied, unnatural, sort of like an uncanny valley effect, even as you're watching the sound come out perfectly synced to someone's mouth. One of my favorite examples of this is from 2013's The Great Gatsby.
Get dressed. I'm going to lunch.
In the scene, Leo's Gatsby picks up Tobey Maguire's Nick Carraway and takes him out to lunch, inviting him for a drive in his roadster.
Look here, old sport. What is your opinion of me anyhow?
Along the way, Gatsby decides to try and suss out whether Nick trusts him and buys the story of who he is, all while his driving becomes more and more reckless. Well, in order for the audience to play along, they need to hear the lines, and hear them they do. Leo looped the entire sequence.
I don't want you to get the wrong impression from all these bizarre accusations you must be hearing. A pack of lies, I guarantee. You've heard the story. Oh!
But there's something wrong about how it comes off. For starters, you'll notice the level of his audio remains exactly consistent throughout the conversation.
I was brought up in America but educated at Oxford because all my ancestors have been educated there for many years. You see, it's a family tradition.
The roar of the engine, whipping of the wind, or the sound of the tires on the dirt road never overtake or obscure what he's saying, which you would expect to happen at least a little bit if you were actually in the car with them. Also, as the camera shifts position, sometimes moving farther away from the car, the echo or reverb of the distance of the audio doesn't change as well.
Collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game.
Usually, even though the camera is often supposed to be somewhat omniscient in the way it shows an audience the scene, lowering the audio of a distant subject and mixing in more background noise is a usual trick to make it feel like more a part of the world. If you're listening to something farther away, your brain expects some level of perceived distance in the audio too. Makes sense. Here's another shot from Lord of the Rings, one of my favorites, that shows how this is supposed to work.
Sauron has regained much of his former strength. He cannot yet take physical form, but his spirit has lost none of its potency.
But for Gatsby, Leo's dialogue is absolutely steady, even as the scene goes increasingly off the rails, which is why it begins to sound fake. For some shots, they didn't even bother to try to match the words up with his lips.
Oh, Europe! Yes, Europe! Paris, Venice, Rome, Vienna, Zurich, Helsinki, Moscow, Istanbul. Moscow, Istanbul.
Now, The Great Gatsby is a highly stylized movie, so part of me finds it a little hard to believe that this way of mixing the audio wasn't intentional. The construction of the scene is already a little outside reality, much like Gatsby himself. It's like a tongue-in-cheek design choice by Baz Luhrmann, whose stuff is never really supposed to represent true reality.
Spectacular! Spectacular!
And now for a bit of contrast. How about an example of a time a filmmaker should have employed ADR, but didn't? Let's go back to 2013. We have David O. Russell's American Hustle, the true-ish story of the Abscam corruption scandal of the late 70s. And I want to highlight another channel again, Why Doesn't It Work? And their great video, Poorly Recorded Dialogue and American Hustle.
4 main problems with dialogue are vocal distortion, gain hiss, microphone placement, overlapping dialogue.
The creator does an excellent job of pointing out instances in the movie where the on-set audio recording was not great, but kept in the film anyway.
Good night! No, that's not. He died a different way many years later! You should have gone away.
We've got someone in an office that's way too echoey, thus confirming they're in a large studio set.
You want to use the Sherman suite? The entire...
Then there's this bit where crosstalk was picked up on an actor's mic.
Fucking confused too, alright?
Did you hear it? Let's have another listen.
I'm confused.
Fucking confused too, alright?
I think we should fuck.
Did you get it that time?
Fucking confused too, alright? Fucking confused too,
It is
alright?
difficult to say why this wasn't left on the cutting room floor.
Now, I personally lay the blame for that decision on the director, rather than the film crew getting so-so audio. Now, David O. Russell is a bit controversial.
I'm trying to fucking help you. Do you understand me? I'm being a fucking collaborator.
Certainly a director who's very intense
Hey, bitch.
with his actors on set. So I can sort of see how someone like him would place a lot more value on the natural on-set performance that he managed to extract from his actors.
Amy Adams was reduced to tears most days by director David O. Russell on the set of Oscar-nominated movie American Hustle.
Even if the audio quality wasn't as crisp as it should have been.
O. Russell, who has a reputation for being difficult to work with, so abused Amy during the shoot that Christian Bale got in his face and told him to stop being so aggressive.
Either that or the actors refused to go into the booth with him afterwards. I mean, this is the guy that George Clooney of all people punched on set. I wouldn't want to be trapped in an audio studio with him either. 2010's Tron Legacy also had some audio issues during post-production. Like Lord of the Rings, their raw audio from set had some extra noise.
So they had to have great costumes, and part of these great costumes had these beautiful lights that went in them, which illuminated the characters so that the light would bounce off the other one and they'd look great. But these lights had this whine.
This may be Clube's game here, but in my world, he's gone in one keystroke. But I can't do anything unless I get to the portal.
It was horrible. Even trying to cut this stuff, a picture editor, you'd get a migraine just even listening to it for 2 seconds. So we knew we couldn't use that for the final product.
But, like American Hustle, they wanted to preserve as much of the original performance as possible. So they ended up using an audio processing technique called Nova that would isolate and extract the specific frequency of the light suit noise from the audio track.
This may be Clube's game here, but in my world, he's gone in one keystroke. But I can't do anything unless I get to the portal.
Now, David O. Russell might not have had the time, budget, or even inclination to go this extra mile for his audio, but it does show what is capable of being done today to fix these issues. And of course, Tron Legacy still employed a bit of ADR fixing as well.
So the fact that any of that production is usable is a miracle, and a lot of it actually was usable. But there's a couple scenes that are completely ADR, and I don't think you'd know.
So between good performances from ADR and a great team effort on the production side of things, I think we came out with a dialogue track that's pretty solid.
Where are you taking me?
But now we get into the really fun stuff. Alright, I just want to real quick go over how I'm using a bunch of these audio terms, because you're going to hear other filmmakers in this video use a lot of this stuff interchangeably. I tend to think of ADR as an umbrella word for any dialogue added in post-production that is supposed to sound like it's actually taking place in the scene. Looping, which we've already gone over, is a straight-up replacement. Dubbing, I think of as when you try to change or modify what someone said. And I use voiceover or VO when something is added or slipped in on a cutaway or reaction shot. Now, I don't want to get overly technical here. I come from the reality, lifestyle, cooking TV realm, and we are a little bit more undisciplined. Almost all audio is referred to as VO in my professional world. I've had producers in TV refer to like this audio, like my words on camera, as VO before, so we're not going to be very strict. Let's just leave it at that. But I do bet that when you hear the word dubbing, something specific comes to mind.
I'll take a pound of nuts. That's a lot of nuts!
Yes, when a movie's dialogue is changed from one language to another, you usually call that dubbing. And you probably have something poorly done or funny in mind when you think of that as well.
Hey, who's he? I don't know.
But there is one show that pretty much created a whole genre by mostly successfully dubbing all their dialogue.
It was a big part of every episode. ADR saved most of the episodes.
I'm talking, of course, about Power Rangers.
Yeah! You and your playmates have met your match!
Power Rangers essentially created a whole industry around the use of dubbing to repurpose other footage.
The show is shot in Japan first. So a lot of the footage that they have, it's edited.
And did it well enough to last however many bazillion seasons and spin-offs we've gotten over the last 30 years. But of course, Power Rangers had it easy, like they didn't have to usually match mouth movements. Everyone's in a helmet or a weird monster costume. I did find a good example of a dub, though, where the audio not only matched the mouth, but the change worked. This example actually comes from the Red Letter Media guys in their 2023 review of the 1990 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie.
I love being a turtle!
Frequent guest and comics artist Freddie Williams points out how a sequence at the farm in which Mikey would have taken a dark turn in the original script was cut, but footage relating to it was still used.
There's the scene where there's a turtle who it's shot as Mikey, but it's voiced over as Raph on top of the barn, and he throws his hands up and he yells Splinter.
Oh yeah.
If you look close, those are nunchucks, and that's Mikey.
I really like this example because it shows how they got to keep this awesomely lit and emotionally expressive shot in the movie even though the larger sequence it was a part of got axed, simply with an appropriate audio change using ADR or a dub. Although funny enough, you might have noticed Freddie refers to it as a voiceover in the video.
It's shot as Mikey, but it's voiced over as Raph.
See how confusing it can get? Finding good examples of dubs that work well is a little difficult though, because most times you catch something like this where they try to change something over someone's mouth, it just looks wrong. like it was an obvious mistake that someone was trying to fix. In this scene in 2022's Triangle of Sadness,
never argue with an idiot. They'll only bring you down to their level and beat you with experience. Mark Twain.
Woody Harrelson clearly attributes the quote he is giving in audio to Mark Twain. But if you look at his lips, he's actually mouthing George Carlin.
Mark Twain. Mark Twain.
George Carlin. Now, George Carlin did say these words, but he was far from the first, and it even appears that the Mark Twain credit might be inaccurate. So the filmmakers must have had this line attributed to Carlin all the way up into post-production when someone fact-checked it, and they felt the need to fix it. Why they just didn't use a cutaway or something, I have no idea. But it does remind me of one of my favorite lost art forms, the made-for-TV edit.
If we had an idea about what we do, we would not be good at what we do, would we? We would be sloppy. You calling us sloppy?
For those of you younger, oh geez, that might be a lot of you, okay. Largely before streaming, movies would come to network and cable channels and have to be edited somewhat. They have much stricter rules for what can air on network and cable as opposed to streaming, and for curses, for some reason, they didn't like using bleeps. Probably because you can usually still tell what the curse was.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
So the movies would dub other words over the curse.
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon.
Yippee-ki-yay, Mr. Falcon? There's no Mr. Falcon in the movie.
In order for the dub to feel as natural as possible, the words being dubbed have to match the mouth movements as closely as possible.
See what happens, Larry? You see what happens when you fuck a stranger in the air?
That's where you get nonsensical sentences suddenly popping up. And for a while, it became standard for actors to actually do passes of these in the booth.
You see what happens, Larry? You see what happens when you find a stranger in the Alps?
Which had the extremely funny effect of feeling almost more out of place because of the uncanny valley.
I've had it with these motherfucking snakes on this motherfucking plane!
Because you would be hearing the actual actor's voice and the words would match the mouth, but the words made no sense.
I have had it with these monkey-fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane! Everybody strap in!
But the coup de grace of curse word dubs has to be this infamous line from Galaxy Quest that actually made it into the theatrical run. The story goes that the original idea behind the movie was one that was a little more adult and dark, but by the time it was ready to release, the studio wanted a much more family-friendly affair to piggyback off the success of the Rugrats movie of all things. So, Sigourney Weaver's clear F-bomb at the start of the Crusher sequence
Well, screw that!
was dubbed over. And despite what some people seem to remember, this was the way it was originally released, too. Time for a quick intermission question. There have been a lot of famous movie quotes over the years, but would you think that the most famous line from the movie Jaws, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," was dubbed over or looped in post-production? Tell you what, I'm even gonna let you look up the answer on Google. Why? We're gonna get into it a little bit later. Now, what if you don't want something obviously awkward like an ADR dub over the wrong dialogue or someone's moving mouth?
All right, I want you back real fast. All right, I want you back real fast. You back real fast.
Well, as an editor, you can try to sneak the audio insert in a few different ways. Well, one way is to hide it by adding the voice over a busy shot. Here's a clever one I was able to pick out. I love 1995's Mortal Kombat. Sure, it's a silly PG-13ified version of one of the most violent video games, but it just oozes 90s nostalgia. While the 2021 remake delivered the blood and guts, it just couldn't match the original's great character dynamics of the three leads, Liu Kang, Johnny Cage, and Sonya Blade.
Nice dress.
The chemistry between the three blows out of the water everything the reboot tried to do with, Cole? Ugh, my mouth gets bored just saying the character's name.
This is where you fall down.
But seriously, the original had satisfying arcs.
This is where you fall down.
And all their lines, quips, and digs at each other flowed quite nicely between each of them. Here's an example. In the scene, Katana appears to try to lead our heroes out of the underground tunnels in which they found themselves lost.
I know exactly where we're going.
Johnny Cage is leading the way through a tunnel that has clearly not been used in a century, and they have this exchange.
I can smell a perfume. I don't smell anything.
I smell something. Bullshit.
I found a couple early versions of the script online, and in these earlier drafts, a joke between Johnny and Sonia appears in this place, but goes through a few changes. However, one thing remains the same: Liu Kang actually isn't a part of it. This was apparently the case all the way through shooting and into post-production, because what we hear from Liu is an ADR voiceover.
I don't smell anything.
It takes an eagle eye to spot how the editor tried to slip in the insert, but if you take high-res footage, lighten it, and zoom in, you can see the audio plays as Robin Chu's mouth is obscured in shadow and during motion.
I don't smell anything.
But you can just barely tell his lips aren't actually moving.
I don't smell anything.
But even with the closed lips, this ADR is done a lot better than some of the more egregious examples out there.
Don't burn it, pal. Don't burn it, pal.
And I also really like this insert.
I pay money, you carry the bags. Or is that too complicated?
No. I get it.
Again, these actors all have such great chemistry as a threesome that getting Liu to voice over this line, while Robin was most likely in the booth looping some other lines for the movie, adds to the great dynamic in the film.
Thank God I didn't ask him to park the car.
Of course, the simplest thing you can do as an editor to slip in a voiceover as unnoticeable as possible is to use a cutaway, like in this line from Blade Runner.
I've got 4 skin jobs walking the streets.
The number of skin jobs was changed from 5 to 4 via ADR because one of the characters was cut. And here's another example, one I was able to pick out. In anticipation of seeing Twisters in theaters over the summer, I went back and watched the original. For those that didn't see it, Twisters did a great job capturing the feel of a 90s disaster movie, and I love that it was actually shot in film. But the one thing the late sequel was missing, though, was an element of humor and charm, although Glen Powell did his darndest to hold that all on his shoulders alone.
She's a therapist.
But he's not quite at the level of what the late great Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt had in the original movie, along with some great writing.
Yours?
Christ, what? You couldn't resist, could you?
The 96 movie does a good job of keeping the comedy light without feeling like too much comic relief.
Cow.
It's a good balance.
Another cow.
Actually, I think that was the same one.
Towards the end of the movie, when Bill and Joe are running from the final tornado, they enter a barn and notice a bunch of sharp and dangerous looking tools on the wall. Not a place they want to be hiding out from a tornado that's about to fling everything through the air. Now in the original script, Bill simply states, "Not in here," and they move on. But in the movie, we get this great observation from Helen Hunt.
Oh my God, who are these people?
I don't think so.
And this is a perfectly timed tension-relieving joke before the final climax between the two leads. These type of quick little additions are where ADR is best. You know, when you need to add a little bit of extra character to lighten the mood or for pacing. Like this other example from the Turtles,
Down we go!
where Kino gets a few more quips voiced over during his fight.
Stay down!
When you get to the point like in Madam Web where you're having to insert whole new side plots in post, you've probably got a larger problem and your movie is going to look bad no matter what.
This is an emergency. Get off the train.
In that case, the editor was most likely dealing with a ton of studio notes to try and fix mistakes or to beef up plot points that either weren't clear in the test screenings or may have been added late in the game. But little fixes are done all the time, especially if the filmmaker thinks the audience isn't quite getting all the information they need. Here's something from Deadpool 2.
Don't call it a comeback! Hey! Pick on someone your own size!
In one section of the final battle, we've got Colossus versus Juggernaut in their big CGI fight.
Big CGI fight coming up!
In the beginning of the matchup, Juggy is clearly dominating, throwing Colossus around like a doll.
He's doing great.
But there's a turn in the fight. And while he sweeps his opponent off his legs, we hear Colossus say,
"That's right. I did good to you."
Now if you go frame by frame and look closely, you'll notice some of the same things we've talked about in other examples.
That's right. I did good to you.
The editor has tried to slip this line in as the mouth is being covered by the action.
That's right. I did good to you.
The whole arc of Colossus is that at the end of the first movie and beginning of the sequel, he tries to teach Deadpool the ways of the hero. But now at the end of the second movie, it's Colossus who needs to learn to act more like the anti-hero to win.
Who says that rules aren't meant to be broken?
It's time to fight dirty.
Time to sweep the leg, Johnny.
Now, this is really filmmaking 101, but there must have been an issue in post where they didn't have the turn line planned out.
That's right. I'm fighting dirty.
Or a single for Colossus on camera in the right way, which is why they used ADR, as opposed to this line, another for Mortal Kombat, where they had Jax's turn line on camera.
Without your weapons, you are no match for Motaro. I got everything I need right here.
Look, I'm not saying Mortal Kombat Annihilation is better here.
Too bad you will die.
It's just another example of this being done in a fight scene. Look. I'm sorry for bringing Mortal Kombat Annihilation up at all. It just sort of fit with the other Mortal Kombat example.
This is where you fall.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The voiceover from Colossus could also have been in response to a note. Perhaps the studio executive didn't catch the first time the character says he's gonna start fighting dirty at the start of the fight.
It's time to fight dirty.
When they were screening the movie and was suddenly like, hey, why is the silver guy winning now? As an editor, this is the note we get most often, usually a question about something that was literally answered in the previous line. Or they might realize that not even a lot of the audience pays attention half the time either. Deadpool himself is a character that absolutely owes a lot of his success to Ryan Reynolds going off in the ADR booth in post-production. He has the Power Rangers cheat.
Did I leave the stove on?
Where most of the time he has his mask on, so Reynolds can probably just cycle through rapid-fire jokes and then the editor can just slip in the best one.
I am very turned on right now. I'm touching myself tonight.
ADR sessions are often an opportunity for a director to not only try out different takes on a line, but whole different dialogue completely.
Will is very funny. It's always great working with him in looping because he'll look at a scene and I'll say, look, can you come up with something better?
Like this example of Will Smith trying out different jokes for Men in Black 2.
You're not alone in the universe. Remove the arm. Okay. One of us is going to remove that arm. Good choice. Never touch me. Get off. This might be one of those ones to come back to tomorrow.
You never know.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my favorite from Deadpool and Wolverine happens during the drive to Cassandra's base after he meets the others.
See them big hands come close, ain't not a one up inside out.
What Gambit's trying to say is getting Juggernaut's helmet ain't gonna be easy. I'm just making stuff up at this. Yeah, tilt up to blade.
You can tell during the beginning they had some line planned, because Deadpool is nodding his head Red Ranger style. But then when we get to the tilt up line, he's sitting still. I would guess Reynolds just came up with this fourth wall break on the spot while riffing over this footage.
Ain't gonna be easy. I'm just making stuff up at this. Yeah, tilt up to blade.
It feels like such a natural reaction too, like a Mystery Science Theater line about the shot, that I actually like it better than the breaks where Reynolds is just mugging for the camera.
Bitch, you think that's what I do?
But just to circle back to the Colossus fight in Deadpool 2 real quick, I have an interesting question for you. We were talking about a big CGI fight. Would you count it as ADR if the entire character was computer generated, and all their lines had to be added in post anyway? What about a purely animated movie or a video game? In the original SHREK, there was a line that had to be added late into the process.
Attention all fairy tale things.
However, Mike Myers had finished all his recording and was unavailable to come back into the booth. So Jeffrey Katzenberg invited him out to dinner and then reportedly ambushed Myers with a microphone and a makeshift recording studio in the back of a limo. For that line, at least they did have the animation completed though. After all, with animation, can't you simply just draw your way out of a missing line? Well, there are instances in which a new piece of dialogue may have to be inserted after all the animation is done, after all the rendering is done.
That's right.
You need that line in, but all of your animators have punched out for the day. Or you fired them, because that's the new thing to do. That's great. Support animation workers, by the way. Well, I do have one example from a video game where it's clear they used ADR to fix something later. I'm so glad Resident Evil 2 has been re-released for PC on GOG this past year because it has one of my absolute favorite lines in a video game cutscene. Now, the graphics from the Resident Evil 2's FMVs certainly look dated now, but there's one thing you can clearly tell. When someone is supposed to be talking, their mouths clearly move.
I'm finally here. Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down!
Maybe not perfectly, but you can see the intention there.
Name's Leon Kennedy. Nice to meet you.
Mine's Claire. Claire Redfield.
But there's something funny going on with the opening introduction to Leon.
What have we got here?
There's a line or two over shots of Leon's mouth while it's not moving.
Man, what a mess! What could have done this?
But maybe you can excuse that. This was still an early time in video game FMVs. Then maybe they just didn't bother to animate everything.
What are these things?
But there is one line that was definitively added in after all the rest of the animation work was done.
What's up with that guy? That was a clean hit. What's up with that guy? That was a clean hit.
This line has all the hallmarks of a bad ADR, and it honestly makes some of the inserts from Madam Web blush. But damn, do I love it.
What's up with that guy? That was a clean hit.
It's forced into this quick shot where Leon's mouth is covered.
What's up with that guy? That was a clean hit.
And it's almost even hidden by the gunshots, as if the editor who slipped it in was embarrassed they had to do it in the first place and tried to cover it up. It's also just like awkward wording as well. Like, why is he saying it this way in the middle of the fight with zombies? Like, shouldn't he have said something like, "What? They're still coming!" Or, "No, they're not dying!" It's also the tone of the line that gets me every time. It's such a shift from everything else. It's like Leon suddenly turns into Rodney Dangerfield. Like, "Hey, that was a clean hit. Oh, I get no respect from these zombies, huh?" Oh, wow. My audience is not gonna get that reference. Oh boy. I also like to imagine what note led to this insertion too. Resident Evil 2 was a game in which the creators had a nearly completed build that they then scrapped and started over from almost scratch. In what universe is there a scenario after doing all that work to make the game twice would someone have raised their hand during the final screening of that cutscene right before the game goes gold and go, "Hey, why isn't Leon more surprised by the zombies? Those are clean hits." I'm guessing such a person wouldn't survive the ensuing glares of Shinjin and Hideki after that. So those are some of my most fun examples of ADR, looping, dubbing, and voiceover, in what was a much deeper dive in the subject of audio post-production than I originally meant. But I hope you got a good sense of just how much this technique is used outside of the awkward comedic effects of when it's implemented poorly. Before we go, I just have one more movie I want to talk about concerning our intermission question, 1975's Jaws. So, was the famous line,
"You're gonna need a bigger boat,"
re-recorded in post-production as an ADR, dub, or loop? What did you find when you Googled it? Well, you might have come across this blog post posted by Medium if you Googled famous ADR lines and the line from Jaws. The top 10 iconic movie scenes using ADR. And it's not real. As far as I can tell, it's almost exclusively AI nonsense. Well, let me just briefly rant about how freaking hard it is to do accurate research these days online. The first clue is that the picture accompanying it is some weird AI abomination. Secondly, the author listed of this article is something called Amers Production, which is an Indian film company? Also, the last and most important clue is that there's no source or clips to videos or other articles and interviews in order to back up any of this information. Or at least not backed up by any sources that I can find. But let's take a quick look at what it says, because I do feel like I uncovered some interesting info while investigating the line. So, the entry for Jaws' bigger boat line says that while the piece of dialogue was improvised by Roy Schneider on set, the audio that was recorded on the day of the ad-lib wasn't very good, and so it had to be re-recorded later via ADR.
"You're gonna need a bigger boat."
And this would make a lot of sense. The production of Jaws was an infamously troubled shoot.
All the cast and crew were going a little crazy.
It's not the time it takes to take the take that takes the time. It's the time it takes between the takes that takes the time that takes to take.
You heard, the shark is not working. The shark is not working.
The shark is, and the shark never worked.
The trouble is, I can't find anyone mentioning this process happening for this line at all. And you might be thinking, well, is that surprising? And this is an almost 50-year-old movie now. Would there really be information about what went on in the audio booth during post-production? Well, the answer is actually yes. We do have lots of information about this movie, and specifically about the ADR it used. Jaws is such a famous movie, and there have been countless books and documentaries made about the making of this film, that we actually have a lot of behind-the-scenes info.
John Carter, who won an Academy Award, by the way, for Best Sound.
In both ways, there is enormously...
For example, we do know that the audio captured on set for Brody's son Michael came out pretty bad on the day they were filming the scene where Brody tells him not to launch his boat into the ocean, but rather stick to the pond.
Pond's for old ladies.
I know it's for the old ladies, but just do it for the old man, huh?
But for some reason, they couldn't get actor Chris Rebel back in to re-record the line, so they used a sound-alike. June Foray, who voiced Rocky the Squirrel.
Then just where do we find more men?
And once you know it's Rocky from Rocky and Bullwinkle, you can't unhear it.
Pond's for old ladies. Pond's for old ladies.
There's also this interview going over the looping process for the opening scene of Chrissy's death. Apparently, Steven Spielberg poured water over the actress in the recording booth in order to get the best gurgling death noises as the shark was pulling her under.
And he poured water down her throat while she screamed, which is now known as waterboarding. So Steven is actually guilty of a war crime.
And later in the scene where the shark is first glimpsed and we have the famous bigger boat line, there's a piece of ADR that was recorded by Steven Spielberg himself.
Amity Point Light Station to Orca. This is Amity Point Light Station to Orca. Come in, Orca.
It's his voice calling in over the radio.
Mrs. Mark Brody here.
So you're telling me that we have all this info about the ADR from these random lines, but the most famous line from the movie, from almost all movies in fact, no one mentions even offhand about going into the booth to have to re-record it at any point? Also, I did find an alternate take of the shark reveal right before the bigger boat line that has the original production audio.
And action, Roy. Slow ahead. I can go slow ahead. You ought to come down and ladle some of this shit.
And it actually doesn't sound that bad. So I would bet it is all BS. And that's true for the second entry on this list too.
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
Again, I can find no other mention of the audio post-process for the scene in the countless interviews and discussions about this line as well. Also, this line is even more suspect to not be ADR, because when the cab almost hits them, Dustin Hoffman's voice breaks character for a second.
They gotta have some kind of middleman, and that's where old Daniel comes in, you know?
And he drops his Ratso accent.
Hey! I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
I'm walking here. But really what was being said for me was, you know, we're shooting here. That's it.
So just an update from late into the editing of this vid, when I started doing all the research and looking for other ADR examples, this article, along with a bunch of copies of it, were all over the top of Google search, and even in the AI summaries. It appears since then, perhaps because of the negative response Google has been getting to fronting so much of this AI content and its results, that this blog has been pushed down in the algorithm for now. So you might not actually have come across it, but I wanted to leave this section in because I did spend a lot of time looking into it after coming across it so much, and the overall problem with the reliability on the internet is still there. But from what I can tell, this Indian production company, perhaps wanting more of an English presence online, tasked some AI with generating a whole bunch of posts about filmmaking, and scraped the Daily Jaws article and summarized the info wrongly, which is what these things often do. So that's the story as I can piece it together for at least that entry. Whew! Alright, now we're at the end. Sorry for the rant there, I just wanted you to experience some of the black hole I went down looking up some of the stuff.
I may have gone too far in a few places.
Hopefully you found at least my spiral a little entertaining. But now I'd like to hear from you.
I worked on this fucking thing for 3 fucking years.
Do you have any ADR lines you've been able to tell have been added after filming?
My ass.
Do you have any other funny examples of it going badly, like with Madam Web?
It seems like a basic storyline to me.
Maybe you've even listened to an obscure Jaws DVD commentary that proves me wrong. Who knows?
Fuck the actors, save the sound department.
But let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.